I'm Mackenzie Wilson, 32, living two completely different lives. Today, I arrived at our annual family reunion wearing my usual modest outfit and subtle makeup. My Aunt Patricia looked me up and down with that familiar sneer. "Poor girl, still a secretary," she mocked, triggering laughter around the room. If only they knew I was running Horizon Innovations, now valued at $350 million. Little did they suspect that tomorrow, their desperate $100 million deal would need my signature as CEO. Before I tell you how I built my empire in secret, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and hit subscribe if you want more stories about underestimated women who rise to the top. Growing up in the Wilson household meant living in material comfort but emotional coldness. Our 5-bedroom colonial in Connecticut projected success to the outside world, but inside, warmth was scarce, especially for me. My parents, Rebecca and Richard Wilson, built Wilson Enterprises from the ground up, a real estate development company that had seen better days by the time I was a teenager. Still, we maintained appearances, and my parents maintained their expectations. My 3 older brothers, Nathan, Bradley, and Christopher, were groomed for business from the start. Nathan, the oldest at 6 years my senior, was considered the strategic thinker. Bradley, for years older, had a gift for sales. Christopher, just 2 years ahead of me, was the charming one who could sweet-talk investors. Then there was me, the afterthought, the girl, the one who should focus on more suitable pursuits. Family dinners were business meetings where my brothers presented ideas and received feedback. When I tried to join these conversations, my input was treated as cute at best, irritating at worst. "Business isn't really for women, Mackenzie," my father would say, not unkindly, but with absolute conviction. "Your brothers have the temperament for it." My mother, who had given up a promising career in marketing to support my father, would add, "There are other ways to contribute, dear." But it was my Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, who was the most cutting. A divorcee who had married into money and never worked a day in her life, she appointed herself the family's social conscience. "A lady doesn't concern herself with profit margins," she once told me when I was 13. "Focus on your appearance and finding a suitable husband. That's your investment strategy." The only person who believed in me was my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother. A widow who had actually run the books for my grandfather's business for 30 years without credit, she recognized something in me that the others missed. "They underestimate quiet waters," she would whisper to me during our private conversations. "Let them. Deep rivers move with purpose." Grandma Eleanor secretly funded my business courses during high school and encouraged my entrepreneurial ideas. When she passed away when I was 22, I lost my only ally in the family. She left me a modest inheritance, enough to finish my education, but not enough to start a business. More importantly, she left me with confidence that I was on the right path. The most vivid memory that still fuels me today happened when I was 16. I had spent weeks analyzing Wilson Enterprises operations after overhearing my father worry about declining profits. I created a detailed presentation with fresh marketing approaches and cost-cutting measures. I practiced for days, convinced this would be my moment to prove my worth. I still remember the blue folder containing my presentation, the nervous sweat on my palms as I stood at the dinner table. "I've been thinking about ways to improve our market position," I began. The initial indulgent smiles faded as I continued, replaced by uncomfortable glances between my parents. My brothers snickered. When I finished, there was a painful silence. Then my father cleared his throat. "That's very creative, Mackenzie. But business is more complicated than you understand. Those ideas would never work in the real world," Nathan added. "Maybe you should focus on the school dance committee instead," Bradley suggested. Christopher, always the kindest of my brothers, at least tried. "Some interesting thoughts, Mac, but you're missing some fundamentals." Then Aunt Patricia, who was visiting that weekend, delivered the final blow. "Richard, Rebecca, You really should guide her toward more suitable interests. Pretty girl like her should focus on finding a husband who can provide for her, not playing with business ideas." They all laughed. I fought back tears, gathered my papers, and left the table. That night, I made a decision. I would succeed on my own terms, and one day, they would regret underestimating me. College was my escape. I attended state university rather than the Ivy League schools my brothers attended. My parents considered it a step down, but they paid the tuition, expecting me to find a husband there if nothing else. What they didn't know was that I was double majoring in business administration and computer science, taking night classes and working days to pay for the additional courses. It was during my sophomore year that I met Professor Diana Lawrence, the first person since my grandmother who took my ambitions seriously. A former tech executive who had built and sold 2 companies before turning to teaching, she became my mentor. "You have something rare, Mackenzie," she told me after reviewing my analysis of a case study. "You see patterns others miss and opportunities where others see obstacles." With her guidance, I developed my skills and built a network outside my family's knowledge. I interned at tech companies during summers, telling my family I was working as an administrative assistant. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did start in administrative roles, but quickly moved up, impressing managers with my insights and work ethic. I graduated with honors, but even then, my family viewed my education as a nice accomplishment before settling down. At my graduation dinner, Aunt Patricia asked when I was planning to put that degree to use finding a husband with potential. I smiled and said I was considering my options. By then, I had already decided. I would build something of my own, and I would do it completely under their radar. If they couldn't see my value, I wouldn't waste energy trying to convince them. Instead, I would show them when the time was right. I accepted what appeared to be a modest position as an executive assistant at a mid-sized tech firm, much to my family's disappointment. What they didn't know was that my plan was already in motion. I was positioning myself at the intersection of real estate and technology, a space I understood intimately from growing up in the family business, but with a fresh perspective they had never considered. After graduation, I deliberately chose a path that would keep me under my family's radar. Rather than joining Wilson Enterprises, where I would be relegated to an administrative role regardless of my qualifications, I took a position at Tech Forward, a mid-sized tech company focused on business solutions. To my family, I described it as an executive assistant role. In reality, I started in their business development department. Just a stepping stone, I told my mother during our weekly calls. "I'm learning the office environment." She sounded relieved that I had realistic expectations. My father barely acknowledged my job, asking only if the benefits were decent. My brothers teased me about getting coffee for actual business people. I let them believe what they wanted. At Tech Forward, I immersed myself in understanding how technology was transforming traditional industries. I volunteered for extra projects, worked weekends, and absorbed everything I could about emerging tech trends. My particular interest was in how property management and real estate development, my family's business, were ripe for technological disruption. 6 months in, I identified a critical gap in the market. Property developers were using outdated methods to track project progress, manage contractor relationships, and monitor regulatory compliance. The inefficiencies were costing millions. I developed a prototype solution on my own time, using skills from my computer science courses. When I presented it to my direct manager, Jacob, he was impressed enough to arrange a meeting with the company's CTO. They loved the concept, but wanted to take it in a direction that wouldn't address the core problems I had identified. That's when I realized I needed to pursue this independently. Around this time, I attended a tech conference in San Francisco, telling my family it was a required work trip. There, I met Allison Reed, a brilliant software engineer who was equally frustrated with her company's narrow vision. We connected instantly over our shared ambitions. "The solution you're describing would revolutionize project management in real estate," she said over coffee after my question at a panel discussion had turned into an hour-long conversation. I know it would, I replied, but nobody's building it right. Then maybe we should, she suggested. That casual remark was the beginning of Horizon Innovations. Allison and I spent the next 6 months developing our business plan, meeting nights and weekends. I maintained my facade at family gatherings, nodding along when they made assumptions about my administrative career. Still answering phones, Mackenzie? Aunt Patricia asked at Thanksgiving that year. Something like that, I replied, while mentally finalizing our pitch to angel investors. Finding funding was our biggest challenge. I couldn't approach family connections without revealing my plans, and most investors were skeptical of 2 young women with limited professional experience. We faced 27 rejections before meeting Samuel Grant, a retired tech executive who had made his fortune disrupting the insurance industry. You know what I see in you too, he said after our pitch. You're solving a real problem you understand intimately, not chasing a trendy idea. That's rare. He invested $250,000 in exchange for a 15% stake, enough for us to quit our jobs and work full-time on developing our platform. I told my family I had been promoted to an executive assistant position for a private investor, which explained my increased travel and unavailability for family events. They barely asked questions, assuming I had found my level. The first year was brutal. Allison and I worked 18-hour days, living on ramen and coffee. We rented a tiny office in a rundown building and hired 2 recent computer science graduates who believed in our vision. There were technical challenges we hadn't anticipated and market resistance we hadn't prepared for. 3 months in, we ran into a major coding issue that threatened to derail the entire platform. I didn't sleep for 3 days, working alongside Allison to redesign our approach. When we finally solved it at 4 a.m. on the 3rd day, I broke down crying from exhaustion and relief. We can actually do this, I realized, as the solution elegantly solved multiple problems at once. Our first client was a small real estate developer in Phoenix who took a chance on our beta product. When our platform helped them identify and resolve a regulatory issue that would have cost them $1.2 million, word began to spread. We secured 3 more clients that month. Still, I maintained my cover story. At Christmas dinner that year, as my brothers boasted about their achievements at Wilson Enterprises, I sat quietly, exhausted from having just closed our 10th client. When attention turned to me, I simply said things were going fine at my assistant job. At least you're employed, my father said, which was his version of approval. As Horizon grew, so did the complexity of maintaining my dual identity. I opened separate bank accounts, used a different email address for family communications, and even maintained a small apartment near my parents' home for when I visited, while actually living in San Francisco. I became skilled at deflecting questions and keeping conversations focused on others. The strain was emotional as well as logistical. Each time my family dismissed my career, it stung despite my growing success. I developed a protective shell, reminding myself that their approval was no longer my goal. Yet part of me still hungered for recognition, for my father to look at me with the same pride he showed when my brothers made even minor achievements. Why maintain the charade? Allison asked me once, after I returned from a particularly difficult family weekend. You're already more successful than most people will ever be. I'm not ready yet, I admitted. I need to be undeniable before I reveal the truth. What I didn't say was that I feared their reaction. Not just their surprise, but the possibility that even with proof of my success, they might find ways to diminish it. I needed to build something so impressive that not even Aunt Patricia could undermine it with a cutting remark. So I continued my double life, fueling my drive with each dismissive comment, each missed opportunity for my family to know me. Horizon Innovations continued to grow, and with it, my resolution that one day, they would see me for who I truly was, but only when I was ready, and only on my terms. 3 years passed in a whirlwind of growth and strategic decisions. Horizon Innovations expanded from our original 4-person team to over 50 employees. Our property management platform had evolved into a comprehensive suite of tools that integrated project management, regulatory compliance, contractor coordination, and financial forecasting. We had moved from our tiny office to a full floor in a downtown San Francisco building with a view of the Bay Bridge. Yet to my family, I remained Mackenzie, the executive assistant. The disparity between my two lives grew increasingly surreal. By day, I was making decisions affecting millions of dollars, negotiating with major investors, and leading a growing team. By night, in phone calls with my parents, I was still their daughter with a nice, stable job who hadn't found the right man yet. At 30, I was running a company valued at $75 million after our Series B funding round. My personal net worth on paper had reached 8 figures, yet I still shopped for modest clothes to wear at family functions and maintained an inexpensive apartment in Connecticut for visits home. "You should consider buying instead of renting," my mother suggested during one visit, assuming my executive assistant salary was my only income. "It's never too early to build equity." I nodded, not mentioning that I already owned my San Francisco condo outright and had recently purchased a vacation property in Lake Tahoe. Building my executive team became a priority as we scaled. I hired people who complemented my skills and shared my vision. Jessica Peters became our CTO, Robert Martinez our CFO, and Tara Franklin our COO. They became my chosen family, people who saw my true capabilities and pushed me to grow further. "You're the most impressive founder I've ever worked with," Tara told me after we successfully navigated a particularly challenging quarter. "Your strategic instincts are extraordinary." These words meant more to me than my team could know, filling a void left by years of familial dismissal. Yet I kept a professional distance, never sharing details about my family situation. Only Allison knew the full story. Our first major breakthrough came when we developed a proprietary algorithm that could predict regulatory changes likely to affect development projects, allowing our clients to adjust plans proactively. It was a game changer for the industry, reducing risk and saving millions. The trade publication Real Estate Technology Review featured our innovation with the headline, "Horizon Innovations Redefines Risk Management in Development." I declined to be photographed for the article, citing a desire to keep the focus on the technology rather than personalities. In truth, I was preventing my family from discovering my position. I was listed simply as Wilson, CEO, in the company materials, and I used a professional email that didn't include my full name. We began acquiring smaller competitors, incorporating their innovations into our platform. Each acquisition strengthened our market position and expanded our client base. By year 4, we were the dominant technology provider in our niche, with clients across North America and initial expansion into European markets. The complexity of maintaining my dual identity increased proportionally with our company's growth. I used a series of shell companies and trusts to manage my personal wealth, keeping my name off public documents whenever legally possible. I limited my appearances at industry events and avoided business functions in Connecticut or New York where I might encounter family connections. Despite these precautions, there were close calls. During a major technology conference in Boston, I spotted my brother Christopher across the exhibition hall. I ducked behind our company's booth while sending Allison to represent us during that time slot. Later, Christopher mentioned attending the conference to my parents during a dinner I was present for. "You should have seen the innovations they're bringing to real estate tech," he said excitedly. "There's this one company, Horizon something, that's completely changing the game." I nearly choked on my water as he continued, "We should look into using their platform at Wilson Enterprises. It could solve many of our efficiency problems." "I'll look into it," my father replied dismissively. "Those tech solutions are usually overpriced and underdeliver." I bit my tongue, knowing our platform could indeed solve many of the issues their company was facing. The most challenging aspect of my double life wasn't the practical logistics, but the emotional toll. Every milestone Horizon achieved was celebrated with my team, but kept secret from those I had grown up with. Each time I hit a personal goal, purchasing my first luxury car, taking my first-class international flight, making my first $1 million philanthropic donation, I had no one from my early life to share it with. I began seeing a therapist to help manage the psychological weight of my choices. Dr. Karen helped me understand that my secret wasn't just about proving my family wrong. It had become a shield protecting me from potential rejection. "What are you waiting for?" she asked during one session. "What needs to happen before you feel ready to reveal the truth?" After reflecting, I realized I was waiting for undeniable, overwhelming success, a level of achievement so significant that not even my most critical family members could diminish it. I wanted leverage, not just accomplishment. That opportunity came more quickly than I anticipated, though not in the way I expected. As Horizon continued to expand, we made a strategic decision to move into government contracts, developing specialized versions of our platform for municipal development projects. This led us to create a subsidiary investment group, Aurora Capital, that could participate in public-private partnerships across the country. Aurora's team identified promising development projects that could benefit from both our technology and capital investment. What I didn't know was that one of those projects would soon bring my two worlds into direct collision and force a reckoning I wasn't yet prepared for. I was reviewing quarterly projections with our executive team when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Emergency family meeting this weekend. Your father insists everyone attend. No exceptions." The timing couldn't have been worse. We were finalizing our expansion into Asian markets, but family emergencies were rare enough that I knew this must be serious. I arranged to fly to Connecticut that Friday, briefing my team that I'd be unavailable except for genuine crises. "Family stuff," I explained vaguely to Tara. "Shouldn't take more than the weekend." What I didn't expect was to walk into the eye of a financial hurricane. Wilson Enterprises, my family's once solid real estate development company, was on the brink of bankruptcy. The tension was palpable as I entered my parents' living room. My father, Richard, looked 10 years older than when I'd seen him at Christmas, his face drawn with stress. My mother sat beside him, clutching his hand, her usual perfect composure fractured by worry. My brothers occupied various positions around the room, their typical confidence replaced by tense postures and grim expressions. And Patricia was there too, of course, sitting primly in an armchair as though at a social tea rather than a family crisis meeting. Finally, she remarked as I entered, "Now we can begin." My father got straight to the point. "Wilson Enterprises is in trouble," he announced, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "The Westlake development project has failed catastrophically. Cost overruns, regulatory issues, contractor disputes. It's a perfect storm." The Westlake project had been the company's largest undertaking, a mixed-use development that was supposed to revitalize a struggling neighborhood while generating substantial profits. It had been Christopher's baby, his chance to prove himself as the future of the company. "We're looking at potential bankruptcy," my father continued. "Everything we've built over 40 years could be gone within months." My mother squeezed his hand tighter. "We've already taken second mortgages on both houses," she added softly. The implications sank in. Not just the business, but my parents' personal assets were at risk. My father had always kept the business and family finances intertwined, a practice I'd recognized as dangerous years ago, but had no standing to criticize. "How did this happen?" I asked, genuinely shocked at the scale of the disaster. Nathan shot a glare at Christopher. "Ask him. His project, his mess." Christopher's face reddened. "You were the one who pushed for accelerating the timeline. We wouldn't have had these contractor problems if we'd stuck to the original schedule." "Boys," my father warned, but with none of his usual authority. Bradley jumped in. "We all know the real problem was inadequate due diligence on the regulatory requirements. The environmental remediation alone has cost millions we didn't budget for." The brothers continued blaming each other while I sat quietly observing. The issues they were describing, contractor management, regulatory compliance, timeline coordination, were exactly the problems our platform at Horizon had been designed to prevent. A bitter irony that the family business was failing due to issues my secretarial work had solved for hundreds of other companies. What's the plan? I finally asked, interrupting the circular firing squad. My father sighed heavily. We have one potential lifeline. Maxwell Incorporated has offered to buy a controlling interest in the company. I stiffened at the name. Maxwell was notorious in the industry for acquiring distressed properties, stripping them of assets, and discarding the remains. They had a particular reputation for slashing staff and reneging on community commitments. That's corporate suicide, I said before I could stop myself. Everyone turned to look at me with varying degrees of surprise and annoyance. And what would you know about it? Aunt Patricia asked coldly. My father gave a dismissive wave. Maxwell isn't ideal, but they're our only option right now. Actually, my mother interjected with unusual assertiveness. There is another possibility. She nodded to my father to continue. He straightened slightly. Yes, an investment group called Aurora Capital has expressed interest. They've offered a $100 million deal that would save the company, allow us to complete Westlake, and let the family retain some ownership stake. My blood ran cold. Aurora Capital, our subsidiary. My company was the potential savior my family was pinning their hopes on. This couldn't be happening. The terms are much better than Maxwell's, Bradley admitted. But we don't know much about them. They're very private. Christopher nodded. Their representative was impressive, though. Very knowledgeable about the industry and our specific situation. I felt dizzy. That would have been James Harper, Aurora's chief investment officer, who reported directly to me. He would have had no idea of the connection. When do you need to decide? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We have a meeting tomorrow with Aurora's CEO, my father said. If all goes well, we sign papers immediately after. Maxwell has given us until end of business Monday to accept their offer otherwise. Aunt Patricia sniffed. I still think Maxwell is the safer choice. We know who they are. This Aurora group came out of nowhere. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The irony was almost too much to bear. My company, the one built by the secretary they all dismissed, was now positioned to either save or acquire my family's struggling business. Where are you staying tonight, Mackenzie? My mother asked, switching to practicalities. I have a hotel room in town, I replied automatically, my mind still racing with implications. Nonsense, she said. Stay here. We need the family together right now. I agreed reluctantly, needing time alone to process and make calls. As the meeting broke up, Aunt Patricia cornered me by the staircase. It's times like these when we see who the strong ones are, she said with a pointed look at my brothers. Though I suppose it's a blessing you're not involved in the business. Too much stress for a woman to handle. I smiled tightly. Everyone handles stress differently, Aunt Patricia. Indeed. Speaking of which, how is your little secretary job going? Still answering phones? The mockery in her voice was unmistakable. Even with the family business crumbling, she couldn't resist belittling me. Something like that, I replied, the same answer I'd given for years. Well, at least you have stability, she said with false kindness. Unlike your brothers. Though you really should have aimed higher, dear. A woman your age should be more established. I excused myself and retreated to my old bedroom, now converted to a guest room, but still containing echoes of my childhood. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I made an encrypted call to Allison. We have a situation, I told her, keeping my voice low. Aurora is in talks to save my family's company. What? She gasped. I don't even know what that is. Cosmic irony. It's a disaster waiting to happen, I replied. James has no idea he's been negotiating with my family. The CEO they're expecting to meet tomorrow is me. So, what are you going to do? I stared at the faded outline on the wall where my business school acceptance letter had once hung, removed by my mother who thought it cluttered the room. I don't know yet, I answered honestly, but I think my cover is about to be blown, whether I'm ready or not. The annual Wilson family reunion was scheduled for the same weekend as the emergency meeting. Unfortunate timing that couldn't be changed because relatives were already traveling from across the country. So despite the crisis, Saturday afternoon found us at my parents' lake house, maintaining appearances with extended family who remained unaware of Wilson Enterprises' precarious situation. I arrived deliberately late, having spent the morning in urgent conference calls with my executive team. We had temporarily halted Aurora's negotiations with Wilson Enterprises, citing internal review procedures, buying me 24 hours to make an impossible decision. The lakeside property looked the same as always, manicured lawns sloping down to the private dock, white tents set up for the catered lunch, cousins' children running between tables while the adults clustered in their usual social hierarchies. Nobody would guess that the hosts were facing financial ruin. I wore a simple blue sundress from a department store and minimal jewelry, my usual secretary-appropriate attire for family functions. My actual wardrobe in San Francisco consisted of designer pieces and custom suits, but that Mackenzie remained carefully hidden. "There she is," called my cousin Emma as I approached the main tent. "The career girl." Several relatives turned to look, offering the same patronizing smiles I'd grown accustomed to. I braced myself for the usual barrage of questions about my non-existent love life and mythical secretary position. Aunt Patricia materialized at my side, champagne flute in hand, despite the early hour. "Mackenzie, darling, we were just discussing you," she said loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause. "Tell everyone about your job." Still with that same little company. I maintained my practiced smile. "Yes, still there." "And what is it you do again?" "Answer phones? Schedule meetings?" Her tone made it clear these were beneath consideration as actual career options. "I assist the executive team," I replied vaguely, the same answer I'd given for years. My cousin Thomas, who worked in finance in Boston, joined the conversation. "You know, Mackenzie, I could probably help you find something with more potential. My firm is always looking for sharp administrative staff." "That's so kind," I replied, the words tasting like ash. Thomas's firm was actually one of our clients at Horizon, though he wouldn't know that given his mid-level position. "She's content where she is," Aunt Patricia interjected. "Aren't you, dear? Not everyone has ambition." She turned to the wider group. "Mackenzie has always been the cautious one." Safe choices. I felt the familiar burn of anger but tamped it down as I had countless times before. My father caught my eye from across the tent and gave a small headshake, his signal to keep family harmony at all costs. My brothers worked the crowd separately, maintaining the family facade despite their own anxieties. Nathan was deep in conversation with an uncle who was a retired banker, perhaps seeking last-minute advice. Bradley charmed a group of cousins with a story that had them laughing, his sales skills deployed to distract from reality. Christopher stood alone by the lake, the weight of the failed project visible in his posture. Lunch was served, and I found myself seated at a table with Aunt Patricia, her daughter Melissa, and several other relatives who immediately turned the conversation to their children's accomplishments. "Jason just made partner at his law firm," announced my second cousin Diane. "Youngest in the firm's history." "Elizabeth's art gallery in Chelsea is expanding to a second location," added another cousin. "My Stephen just closed a $20 million deal for his company," said Aunt Patricia, though everyone knew Stephen worked in middle management and had likely been peripheral to any such deal. Eventually, all eyes turned to me expectantly. "And what about you, Mackenzie? Any exciting developments?" asked Diane with the forced interest of someone who expected no noteworthy answer. Before I could respond, Aunt Patricia jumped in. "Mackenzie is very dedicated to her secretary position. What is it now, 10 years with the same company? Such loyalty is rare these days." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Several relatives exchanged glances that mixed pity with relief that their own children were more successful. It's actually an executive assistant position, I corrected mildly, though the distinction would matter little to them. Of course, dear, Aunt Patricia said with exaggerated patience. Executive assistant. Much more prestigious. Do you get to order the special coffee now? The table erupted in polite laughter, at my expense. Something inside me began to crack. A decade of dismissal, condensation, and minimization crystallized in that moment of collective laughter. I had built a company valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, employed over 100 people, transformed an industry, and sat here being mocked for fetching coffee. I was saved from responding by a commotion at the entrance to the tent. Martin Sterling, my family's longtime lawyer, was hurrying toward my father, his expression urgent despite his attempts at discretion. My father excused himself from his conversation and met Martin halfway. They spoke in hushed tones, but in the sudden quiet of the tent as people watched curiously, snippets carried. CEO of Aurora will only meet with the entire family leadership. Insists on all principals being present tomorrow. Deal could fall through without immediate signatures. My father's face, already strained, grew more troubled. He beckoned my brothers to join the conversation. I remained seated, watching the family drama unfold while appearing uninvolved, a role I had perfected. Aunt Patricia couldn't resist the opportunity to comment. More business troubles. That's what happens when a company doesn't adapt with the times. If Richard had listened to Stephen's advice years ago about diversification, I tuned out her revisionist history, knowing her son had never offered my father any substantive business advice. Instead, I watched as my brother's expressions shifted from concern to alarm. Eventually, my father approached our table. Mackenzie, excuse us for a moment. Family business matter. The exclusion, so routine I usually didn't notice it anymore, struck me with fresh pain given the circumstances. I was being dismissed from a discussion about a company that was, unknowingly, dealing with my company. Of course, I replied automatically, standing to leave. Actually, Aunt Patricia interjected, Mackenzie might have valuable input. After all, she is an executive assistant. Perhaps she could tell you how proper businesses handle these situations. The table again rippled with laughter. My brothers looked embarrassed but said nothing. My father, distracted by the crisis, barely noticed the mockery. We need to discuss some sensitive business matters, he said apologetically. Enjoy the party, everyone. As my father and brothers retreated to the house with Martin, Aunt Patricia raised her glass. To the Wilson men, she said loudly, carrying the burden of the family legacy while the rest of us enjoy the benefits. I locked eyes with her, something in my expression finally giving her pause. Is something wrong, Mackenzie? She asked with false concern. Nothing at all, Aunt Patricia, I replied, setting down my napkin. If you'll excuse me, I need some air. I walked down to the dock, away from the party, and stared across the lake. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would learn that the secretary they had dismissed for a decade was the CEO whose signature they desperately needed. The question was, what did I want that outcome to look like? Revenge had been my fantasy for years, seeing their shocked faces, watching Aunt Patricia sputter apologies, forcing my brothers to acknowledge my success. But now that the moment approached, I wondered if triumph would taste as sweet as I had imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Allison. Decision time. What do you want to do? I took a deep breath of lake air, the same air I had breathed as a teenager dreaming of proving myself. The girl with the business presentation in a blue folder, crying in her room after being laughed out of the dining room. I texted back, book the conference room at the Westin Hotel for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Alert the team. It's time. Back at the party, I made my excuses and left early, claiming a headache. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the family gathering growing smaller in the distance. The next time I saw them, everything would be different. Whether that difference would heal old wounds or create new ones remained to be seen. In my hotel room, I laid out my CEO clothes for the morning, the armor I would wear to face my family as my true self for the first time. I spent the night alternating between strategic planning calls with my team and staring at the ceiling, replaying a decade of dismissive comments and wondering if tomorrow would finally silence them. By dawn, I had made my decision. This wasn't just about revenge or recognition anymore. It was about integrity, being whole instead of divided. Whatever happened, I would no longer live a double life after tomorrow. I arrived at the Westin Hotel 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting. My executive team had flown in overnight. Allison, our CTO Jessica, CFO Robert, and COO Tara. They waited in a separate room, ready to join once I had my initial conversation with my family. "Are you sure about this?" Allison asked as we reviewed our strategy one final time. Her concern wasn't about the business decision. Aurora acquiring Wilson Enterprises made strategic sense, but about the personal fallout. "No," I admitted. "But it's time." I had chosen my appearance carefully, a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation, subtle makeup that enhanced rather than masked, and the one piece of significant jewelry I allowed myself, my grandmother Eleanor's diamond earrings. My hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon rather than the softer style I typically wore at family functions. At precisely 9:55 a.m., I took position in the main conference room, standing at the head of the table with my back to the door, looking out at the city's skyline. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my exterior remained composed. Years of board meetings and investor pitches had taught me to project calm regardless of my inner state. I heard them before I saw them. My father's authoritative voice directing questions to Martin Sterling, my brother's voices overlapping with speculation about what this meeting might hold. They entered the room in a cluster, still talking among themselves. "The CEO of Aurora should be here any minute," Martin was saying. I was told. He stopped mid-sentence as they registered my presence by the window. Confusion rippled through the group. "Mackenzie," my father said, puzzled. "What are you doing here?" "We're about to have an important business meeting." I turned slowly to face them, maintaining deliberate eye contact with my father. "I know. That's why I'm here." My brothers exchanged confused glances. Christopher stepped forward. "Mac, I'm sorry, but this is seriously confidential. Maybe Mom needs help with something while we're tied up here." The condescension in his well-intentioned suggestion strengthened my resolve. I moved to the head of the conference table and gestured to the chairs. "Please, everyone, take a seat." Something in my tone, a note of authority they'd never heard from me before, gave them pause. Martin Sterling, always sensitive to power dynamics, was the first to comply, selecting a chair midway down the table. My father remained standing. "Mackenzie, I don't know what this is about, but we're waiting for the CEO of Aurora Capital." "This is not the time for whatever this is." "The CEO of Aurora Capital is already here," I replied evenly. "I'm the CEO of Aurora Capital, and of its parent company, Horizon Innovations." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face went completely blank, a reset before emotion could register. Nathan's jaw literally dropped. Bradley blinked rapidly as though his vision had malfunctioned. Christopher looked from me to our father and back again, seeking confirmation this was some kind of joke. Martin Sterling, ever the professional, recovered first. "Ms. Wilson," he began carefully, "are you saying that you are the Wilson listed as founder and CEO of Horizon Innovations?" "That's correct, Martin. The company currently valued at approximately $350 million, $375 after last quarter's results," I corrected gently. My father finally found his voice. "This is absurd. You're an executive assistant." "No," I said. "That was a cover story. I've been building Horizon for the past 8 years, starting shortly after graduation." "But why?" Christopher asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Before I could answer, the conference room door opened again, and Aunt Patricia swept in, 15 minutes late as was her custom at any meeting she considered beneath her full punctuality. "Sorry I'm late, but I hardly think my presence is necessary for—" She stopped abruptly, taking in the tableau. "Mackenzie? What is this take your daughter to work day?" She laughed at her own joke. No one joined her. The tension in the room was palpable. "Patricia," my father said tightly, "apparently Mackenzie is claiming to be the CEO of Aurora Capital." "Don't be ridiculous, Richard," she scoffed. "She's a secretary." I pressed the intercom button on the conference phone. "Please send in the executive team." The door opened again, and my team entered. Allison, Jessica, Robert, and Tara, each carrying tablets with presentation materials, each dressed in impeccable business attire that matched the seriousness of the occasion. "Allow me to introduce my executive team," I said calmly. Allison Reed, co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer. Jessica Peters, Chief Technology Officer. Robert Martinez, Chief Financial Officer. And Tara Franklin, Chief Operating Officer. They took positions around the room, professional and poised. The power dynamic shifted visibly as my family suddenly found themselves outnumbered and outflanked. "This is preposterous," Aunt Patricia declared. "Richard, call security. This is clearly some kind of prank or scam." "It's neither, Ms. Wilson-Hughes," Tara responded coolly. Horizon Innovations and its subsidiary Aurora Capital are well-established entities with impeccable credentials. We can provide any documentation you require to verify Ms. Wilson's position. Robert activated the large screen on the wall, displaying Horizon's corporate structure, financial highlights, and media coverage, all with my name and position clearly indicated. My father sank slowly into a chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. "All this time," he murmured. "All these years." "Yes," I confirmed. "While you thought I was answering phones, I was building a company that has revolutionized the industry. The same industry where Wilson Enterprises is now failing." Nathan's shock transformed to anger. "This is why Aurora was interested in our company? Some kind of revenge plot?" "No," I replied firmly. Aurora identified Wilson Enterprises as a potential acquisition target through standard market analysis. The team had no idea of our connection until I informed them yesterday. In fact, I temporarily halted negotiations when I discovered the situation. "So what happens now?" Bradley asked, his sales instincts kicking in, already calculating how to adapt to this new reality. "That depends," I answered. Aurora's offer remains on the table, but I wanted to have this conversation before proceeding. For obvious reasons, I needed to disclose the conflict of interest. "Conflict of interest?" Aunt Patricia's voice rose shrilly. "This is manipulation. Deception." I turned to face her directly. "Deception, Aunt Patricia? Like telling a 16-year-old girl with legitimate business ideas that she should focus on finding a husband instead? Like dismissing someone's career as just answering phones without bothering to learn what they actually do? That kind of deception." Her face flushed red. "You've always been too sensitive. We were trying to guide you toward realistic expectations." "My expectations were perfectly realistic," I countered. "I expected that hard work, innovation, and perseverance would lead to success. What wasn't realistic was expecting my own family to recognize my potential." Christopher looked genuinely distressed. "Mac, we never meant to." 8 years, I interrupted. "For 8 years, I've sat at family dinners listening to you all mock my supposed career while I was building something significant." Yesterday at the reunion, Aunt Patricia suggested I get to order the special coffee now as an executive assistant, and everyone laughed. Do you have any idea what that felt like? My father raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Mackenzie, clearly we've underestimated you. That's obvious now. But this subterfuge was unnecessary. Why not just tell us what you were doing?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said simply. "You would have dismissed it as a girl's fantasy, just like you dismissed every business idea I ever presented. I needed to succeed first, to be undeniable." "And now?" Nathan asked. "You've made your point. You've succeeded. Is the plan to let our company fail as some kind of object lesson?" The question hung in the air, the core issue finally spoken aloud. My team remained professionally impassive, but I knew they were watching carefully. This was no longer just business. It was personal in a way that could cloud judgment. I took a deep breath. No. Aurora's offer is legitimate and fair. The acquisition makes strategic sense for both companies. Wilson Enterprises has valuable land assets and development experience. Horizon has technology that could address precisely the issues that led to the Westlake failure. My father studied me with new eyes, reassessing everything he thought he knew about his daughter. And the terms? The $100 million valuation stands, I confirmed. The Wilson family would retain a 20% ownership stake in the restructured company. There would be positions for those with the appropriate skills who are willing to adapt to our corporate culture and technology integration. And who would lead this new entity? Bradley asked shrewdly. Aurora's current leadership would remain in place, I stated firmly, including me as CEO. The implication was clear. My father and brothers would no longer be in charge. After a lifetime of authority, they would answer to me, if they remained at all. Aunt Patricia gave a theatrical gasp. Richard, you can't possibly consider this. It's unnatural. Maxwell's offer. Maxwell would strip the company bare and fire everyone. My father interrupted, surprising me. He hadn't taken his eyes off me. You've really built all this yourself, Mackenzie? Something in his tone, a mixture of disbelief and the first glimmer of respect, made my throat tighten. Yes, with a great team, but yes. He nodded slowly. I'd like to see the full terms. And I'll need time to discuss this with the family. Of course, I agreed. My team has prepared comprehensive documentation. We can give you the room to review it privately. As my executives distributed tablets with the acquisition details, I caught Christopher watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. When our eyes met, he gave a small, rueful smile. All those times you asked questions about our projects, he said quietly. You weren't just being polite, were you? You were gathering market intelligence. I was trying to help, I corrected him. You just weren't listening. As we prepared to leave the family to their deliberations, Aunt Patricia made one final attempt to reassert her influence. This is still manipulation, she declared loudly, using inside knowledge of family troubles to swoop in like some corporate vulture. I stopped at the door and turned back to face her. No, Aunt Patricia. This is business. Something you've always insisted I wouldn't understand. The door closed behind us, leaving my family to confront both their company's future and their recalibrated understanding of the daughter and sister they had underestimated for so long. 6 months after the revelation meeting, I stood in the atrium of the newly renamed Wilson Horizon Tower, watching employees from both companies mingle at our integration celebration. The merger had been completed 3 months earlier, after intense negotiations and significant restructuring. The changes were substantial. My father had taken a position as chairman emeritus, a largely ceremonial role that acknowledged his founding contribution while shifting actual authority to new leadership. At 72, he had initially resisted the transition, but eventually recognized it was time to step back. Nathan had left the company entirely, unable to accept the new hierarchy. Last I heard, he was starting his own boutique development firm in Chicago, maintaining minimal contact with the family. His departure had been acrimonious, but ultimately necessary. His management style was fundamentally incompatible with our data-driven approach. Bradley had surprised everyone by thriving in the new environment. His sales skills translated well to our expanded client outreach initiatives, and he demonstrated unexpected adaptability to technological integration. We weren't close, exactly, but we had established a mutually respectful professional relationship. Christopher had taken the changes hardest initially, blaming himself for the Westlake failure that had precipitated everything. After some soul-searching, he had accepted a position leading our community development initiatives, where his genuine passion for neighborhood revitalization could be channeled effectively. He was currently completing an executive MBA program at my suggestion, filling gaps in his previously intuitive approach to management. My mother had perhaps undergone the most profound transformation. After the initial shock, she had approached me privately with decades of pent-up regret. "I should have supported you," she admitted during a tearful lunch. "I let my own compromises dictate the limitations I set for you." Our relationship was healing gradually as she shared stories of her own abandoned career aspirations, and I helped her rediscover her marketing expertise through volunteer work with women entrepreneurs. Aunt Patricia remained Aunt Patricia, critical, judgmental, and permanently convinced that my success was some combination of luck and manipulation. I had made peace with the fact that her approval would never come and, more importantly, that I no longer needed it. "Quite a turnout," commented Allison, joining me at the railing overlooking the celebration. "Better than expected," I agreed. "The culture integration is proceeding faster than projections." Speaking of which, she nodded toward the entrance where my father had just arrived, uncharacteristically without my mother at his side. I made my way through the crowd to greet him. At family gatherings, we maintained cordial but somewhat distant relations. This was his first appearance at a company function since the ceremonial ribbon-cutting 3 months ago. "Dad," I said, genuinely pleased. "I didn't expect you today." He looked around at the modernized space that had once been Wilson Enterprises' traditional lobby. "Thought I should see how things are going." We stood in slightly awkward silence before he added, "Your mother wanted to come, but she has that mentoring event with her women's entrepreneurship group." "I know. I helped her prepare her presentation yesterday." He nodded, clearly still adjusting to the new dynamic between his wife and daughter. "The quarterly report was impressive," he offered. "The Westlake project completion under the new system saved significant costs." Coming from him, this was effusive praise. "The technology made the difference," I acknowledged. "But the land acquisition strategy you developed gave us the foundation to build on." Another silence, less awkward this time. "I still don't understand why you felt you couldn't tell us," he finally said, returning to the question he'd asked repeatedly since the revelation. 8 years, Mackenzie. Your own family." I considered my answer carefully. We'd had versions of this conversation before, but perhaps here, surrounded by the tangible evidence of what I'd built, I could make him truly understand. "Do you remember when I was 16 and presented that marketing and efficiency plan at dinner?" Everyone laughed. He shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't realize you were serious." "That's exactly the point, Dad. You didn't take me seriously. None of you did. Can you honestly say you would have believed in Horizon if I'd told you about it at the beginning? Would you have encouraged me the way you encouraged the boys?" His silence was answer enough. "I needed to succeed on my own terms," I continued. "Without family connections, without the Wilson name opening doors. I needed to know I could do it myself." "And now? Was it worth the deception?" I gestured around us at the thriving company. "This is worth it. Building something meaningful is worth it. But the deception? That took a toll I'm only now beginning to process." He seemed to consider this. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said finally. "She always said you had the best head for business in the family." I should have listened to her. The mention of Grandma Eleanor brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I wish she could have seen this. "She knew," he said with surprising gentleness. "Maybe not the specifics, but she knew you would succeed. That's why she left you those earrings. They were her lucky charm in business dealings with men who underestimated her." I touched the diamond earrings I was wearing, the same ones I'd worn to the Revelation meeting, the ones I wore to every important business event. I'd had no idea they held that significance. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several key clients. As I made introductions, I noticed my father watching me with something I'd never seen before in his expression, respect tinged with regret. Later that evening, after the celebration wound down, I sat alone in my office reviewing our latest expansion plans. A knock at the door revealed Christopher. "Got a minute?" he asked, lingering in the doorway. Sure. Everything okay with the community outreach for Riverside? All on track, he confirmed, taking a seat across from me. That's not why I'm here. He hesitated, then pushed forward. I owe you an apology. Not just for recently, but for, well, pretty much our entire lives. I set down my tablet, giving him my full attention. I never actively tried to undermine you, he continued, but I never stood up for you either. I benefited from the family dynamic without questioning it. That was wrong. His sincerity was evident and somewhat disarming. Christopher had always been the kindest of my brothers, but kindness without advocacy had still left me isolated. Why now? I asked. My executive MBA program, he said with a rueful smile. We had a session on unconscious bias in business. The professor could have been describing our family as a case study. He leaned forward. But also because I've seen you in action these past months. You're brilliant at this, Mac. Better than Dad ever was, better than any of us could have been. The compliment, delivered without reservation, meant more than I wanted to admit. Thank you, I said simply. Do you think we can ever be a real family again? He asked. Not just business associates who happen to share DNA? I considered the question seriously. I think we're finding a new equilibrium. It won't be what it was, but maybe it can be something more authentic. After Christopher left, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The revelation had brought professional triumph, but had also forced me to confront the emotional cost of my double life. Working with a new therapist, I was gradually processing the complex mixture of vindication, lingering hurt, and unexpected grief for the family relationships I had wished for rather than the ones I had actually experienced. The company continued to thrive. Our integration of Wilson's assets with Horizon's technology had created synergies beyond our initial projections. Industry publications were calling it a model merger, and our stock had risen accordingly. I had finally stepped fully into the public eye as CEO, giving interviews and accepting speaking engagements that would have been impossible during my years of hiding. One unexpected consequence of going public with my identity was the response from young women in business and technology. I began receiving hundreds of messages from aspiring entrepreneurs who saw in my story a reflection of their own struggles to be taken seriously. This led to the creation of the Eleanor Wilson Foundation, named for my grandmother, which provided mentorship and seed funding to women launching technology companies. At our first foundation event, I shared the podium with my mother, who spoke movingly about the importance of supporting women's ambitions without limitation. Watching her find her voice was perhaps the most healing aspect of the entire experience. The buzzing of my phone interrupted my reflections, a text from Allison reminding me about tomorrow's board meeting. Life continued forward, with new challenges and opportunities constantly emerging. The past could not be changed, but its lessons continued to inform my approach to both business and personal relationships. I had built my success in secret, driven partly by the need to prove my family wrong. Now that the truth was known, I was discovering a different kind of strength, the power of visible leadership, of letting my full self be seen, both vulnerabilities and capabilities. The company I had built in secrecy now flourished in the light. The family that had once dismissed me now grappled with the reality of my accomplishments in various ways, some adapting, others resistant. And I continued to evolve, integrating the driven, secretive founder with the public leader I was becoming. The journey hadn't ended with the revelation. In many ways, that had simply been the beginning of a new chapter. There would always be those who underestimated me or questioned my legitimacy. Aunt Patricia would certainly never change, but I no longer needed universal approval to validate my worth. Success, I had learned, was not measured solely by financial metrics or public recognition, though these had their place. True success lay in building something meaningful, in remaining true to one's vision despite obstacles, and in using achievement as a platform to create opportunities for others. As I prepared to leave the office, I paused at the window overlooking the city lights. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but it was mine to determine, no longer constrained by others' limited expectations or my own need for secrecy. I thought of all the women watching my journey now, looking to me as an example. To them, I would say this: your worth is not determined by others' recognition. Build your dreams anyway. Success is the best response to those who doubt you. But remember that vindication, while sweet, is not the end goal. The true measure of achievement is not proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories of perseverance, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own potential today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the people who know you least are the ones you've known the longest.